So I'll just give you a bit of background about what we're celebrating today and why we're celebrating it. In 2001 in Canada, in Toronto, there was this lady, Marcy Segal, you might wish to look her up, and she thought, wouldn't it be great if we dedicate or we make an effort to use our thinking, our ideas, and our decision making, instead of to complain, but to make a difference in the world, to live a better life, and to possibly help within the community and so on. World Creativity Innovation Week ranges between the 15th and the 21st of April, the 15th being Leonardo da Vinci's birthday, so many great things. And the 21st, which is today, is an International Day of Observance, which has been declared as such by the United Nations. So that's why we're having this seminar today, really. As I mentioned, the webinar will be recorded. I have a list, so I'm going through my list. Apologies for that. We would like to have a question and answer session at the end. So the question and answer session will take place in the following format. If you have any questions, please feel free to write in the chat box. As we go along, if one of our speakers inspires you about something and you might want to ask something, if you're anything like me, you might forget by the end of it. So just write in the chat box and someone from our side will either ask you to ask the question again, or else we will read out the questions for the sake of making things simple. That's it. I'll introduce our panel of speakers now. I'll go by alphabetical order because they're all great people. So Stephanie Borge. Hi, good morning, Stephanie.
Morning to everyone.
Thank you for joining us. So Stephanie is an entrepreneur, an artist, very well renowned. You can see the backdrop there. She's renowned for her Morty styles, and now you might want to tell us a bit about it later. You have another trend that you are currently working on. Esther Kushki. Esther.
Good morning.
Hi, Esther. Good morning.
Yeah.
Esther is a Gestalt psychologist, a child psychologist, and also works on Project Eagle, and also works on the project within the Gabriel Caruana Foundation. So Esther is a mix. We do a lot of different kind of aspects. So lots of contribution coming from your end, Esther.
Thank you.
So thank you for all the activities that you do. We also have Andrew Farrugia. Andrew is the co-founder of Detach. I'm sure that you've seen their lovely illustrations around. They also acquired souvenirs that don't suck a year or two ago, Andrew, I believe.
Yeah, 2018.
2018. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
Then we have, you're very welcome. Then we have Lorinda Mama. Lorinda is, I like the signature on Lorinda's emails. Creator, maker, designer. Lorinda, good morning to you. Lorinda, I know that you were here, but I cannot hear you. So, Lorinda, if you're here, would you like to send us a message?
I can see Lorinda, but I can't hear her.
Okay, I asked if, yes, I can see her now. Lorinda, maybe your mic? You must have pressed something now because I heard a sound. We'll play around with it.
Lorinda is saying in the chat box that there is a security thing.
A security thing, where?
Is it from our side?
Not from our side, not that I know of, because the other speakers can be heard. My sound is not working, okay. Okay. We'll try and figure it out as quickly as we possibly can, Lorinda. In the meantime, if you don't mind, I will have to proceed with the introductions, and maybe Leonie and Christina, may I please ask you to see if you can support Lorinda?
Yes, sure. Christina, can you connect with Lorinda offline, please, and see if there's anything we can do to
Yes, just sent her an email.
mic working? Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, Christina. Okay, so I'll move on. Now we have Tina Mifsud. I came across Tina's morning. Thank you for joining us. I came across Tina's page by sheer coincidence on Facebook, Tina. And I looked at your work and I really loved your work.
Nice, thank you.
Yes, Tina is an artist, a young artist. We have a lot of young people, which is great to see. And then we have Rafaela Zamit. Hi, Raf. Good morning.
Hello, bonjour.
Bonjour. So Rafaela is the executive director at the Gabriel Caruana Foundation. You might wish to tell us a bit more about it. It's social in nature, it's artistic in nature, it's a bit of a hybrid.
Yeah, yes. I think, well, creativity underpins everything that we do. And yes, we work on social, environmental, educational aspect. I mean, shall I give a brief overview or later on?
What we did was, together with the bios, we've posted links
All right.
to your organizations. So perhaps even like our guests could possibly have a look at those links. We're hoping that they would have done so already by now, but you know, so that they will know who you are. But we'll see as we go. Because otherwise, if 7 people give a bit of a snapshot, you know, it will take forever.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
I lack a degree in diplomacy, as you can see. You know me, actually. Last but definitely not least, Elise. Elise, an architect and designer. Hi, Elise. Thank you for joining.
Hello. Good morning.
Okay. So,
thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So as you can see, we have a vast range of creatives on board this morning. And with these creatives, we shall start off with asking a few questions. In the meantime, if you want to add anything else, please feel free. So my first question would be, how do you think that creativity features, not as an artist, but in your daily life in general? I won't call names, but if anyone wants to speak, as long as we don't all speak at the same time. How does creativity feature in your daily life?
Well, I'm all about creativity, so there isn't much space for anything else, to be honest. So I work very long hours, so from morning till evening, it's all about my mind doesn't stop. But even if I want to go out, I want to do something different. So maybe, or cook something different, or taste something different. So I think that's all has to do with creativity and trying to come up with something different. I don't like routines. So.
Don't like routines, but that's an interesting aspect, Stephanie. As you said, like you breed creativity. So you, from the minute you wake up until you go to sleep, you're constantly creative. But how do you actually feel that this creativity features in your life? I mean, it's about going out. So if you're going out, how do you get creative about that?
Especially now with this COVID situation, trying to find new ways even where to have our lunch and dinner, you know, not always on the same table. It could be like on the roof or in the balcony or in the yard, or, you know, taking it out as a picnic, or finding ways how to, in a way, in our daily life, we're trying to be even more creative now because we're limited with things we can do. If before, for example, on a Sunday, we used to go out for lunch. Now we go out for the lunch, but as a picnic. So we find new ways how to cook our food, so it's more practical to take it with us, you know?
Okay, that's an interesting way. I don't know anyone else. Tina jumped when I asked the question. Tina, did you have anything? How does creativity feature in your daily life?
I feel like it makes me more spontaneous, you know, like it's like I'm always trying to find new opportunities and different opportunities, like seeing things from different aspects and not only having one solution, if that makes sense, like having an array of a lot of different things to do, and just being spontaneous in everyday life also makes it more exciting as well, I would say.
Okay, I like that. Actually, we believe in having a number of alternatives, a number of different ways in which you could do or achieve a particular goal. It's one of the things that we kind of talk about when we speak about creativity. So looking for alternatives, how can I make this in a different way, or how can I do this in a different way? So yes, perfectly in line with our typical way of looking at creativity there. You also spoke about spontaneity. Okay, how does spontaneity and creativity feature in your life? Because
If I may interrupt, we have Lorinda. She's back. Can I ask her to say hello? Maybe we can hear her this time.
Hello?
oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay, it's working.
Welcome, Linda.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning. Okay,
Morning.
so Lorinda, I've just asked the first question and Tina's currently replying.
Okay.
So how does creativity feature in your daily life? So maybe you give that a bit of thought while.
Okay.
So sorry, Tina, about that.
No worries.
Because when you're going for alternatives, you make an effort to go for an alternative, to find a different route of achieving something. But then spontaneity kind of emerges, it comes out of the blue or something like that. Yes, I don't know. Maybe you could.
Yes. Wait. Wait, I'm hearing, I don't know if that was a question or I heard something in the background.
No, it's not me. It sounds like someone is doing a lesson somewhere else.
Yes.
Okay, shall I answer?
Yes, please, but hold a bit before, if you don't mind. If our audience could switch their mics off, it would help to avoid feedback and potential kind of interruptions. Go, Tina.
Okay, so spontaneity. It just, to me, anything that excites me, like I jump on board and I always go for it. And with my art, I would say it helps a lot, because if I want to try a new medium, if I want to experiment, I just go for it. And I think it's very important to not hold back and to, like, you know, jump on the wagon and kind of go with the flow. So I think it has a lot to do with not holding back and expressing the way you want to feel through spontaneity.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else wants to pick on that, or whether you would like to tell us about how creativity features in your daily life. Andrew, I think, is going to say something.
Yeah, I have a different approach. Like, I'm a very logical person. I'm very organized, very structured. I plan everything, deadlines. So obviously, you would say that like that doesn't really stimulate creativity, right? But we found at Tafittatsa that the right balance between actually being grounded in what we can achieve and thinking creatively, so we don't have any barriers, but to really explore our other options, works really well for us. And I think I continue that kind of approach throughout my life. You know, if it's something that, I don't know, you're going to go give fuel to your car, you don't need to be creative there. You know, it's like, because you're gonna cause an accident. So I try to sort out those basics that I don't need to worry about as much as possible. So then when it comes to, I don't know, planning something for work, cooking is where I get a bit of flavors going. When you're maybe writing something or thinking about this current situation, that's where then I relax and I let my brain like think without boundaries. It's so that's kind of my two sides. Sometimes I'm really tight with deadlines and really being a pain that everything needs to follow as we discussed. And sometimes we have environments where, listen, there's no right or wrong answer, you know. But I see that distinction between the two aspects of my life.
Fair enough. I mean, different personalities do explore and demonstrate and manifest creativity in different ways. One way in which both you at Tefitazza and Stephanie on her page, however, during this COVID survival, if you want, era, you both came up with drawings, ideas for drawings. I remember going through Stephanie's page and I saw a few pages for people to print and color in. Like there's one of Rabat, there's a variety of them. And at Tefitazza also, you have the same, but I think you linked it to a competition. There's photos of children who printed your templates. And so
We were very surprised by the reaction of that, actually. Like first of all, I was really happy that a lot of artists, it's like COVID-19 came first and giving something to the community straight away was a no-brainer. So I think where before we're a bit more hesitant about artworks, maybe it's not the first idea that comes to mind. With the coloring books, you see, if you can turn it into a product. I think when this COVID-19, it's interesting that many of us, that was their first kind of go-to. You know, let's do something for kids, let's do something to give back. So that was amazing. I was amazed by the reaction. Actually, people do have time to color stuff right now.
Yes, that is very true, and it's amazing as well that it brought families together. So it wasn't just a kids activity. I had people sending me photos of their families coloring in together. So it was a way of bonding as well for the family, which was nice. And adults, they kind of rediscovered their little kid in them, rekindled some nice memories, nostalgia, whatever, and just they used art as therapy, just to take your mind off. And I was even coloring other artists' coloring sheets, that they were in something when I started posting, then other artists were following as well. And I was printing those out and coloring myself. So it was fun. It was really.
So perhaps our audience, if anyone is interested, they could go to your pages, Stephanie Borgia and Tefitazza, for example, and look these templates up and take a look at whatever you like, whatever you might wish to color in and print. I think Lorinda did something similar, yeah? Oh, you're off again. Hold on. Wait.
Lost her again.
No. She's here.
Okay.
We've lost you again, Lorinda. I don't know what it is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know, maybe the headphone. Yes, so I was saying I used to do printables anyways for my page because I do printables for children. And then when this came out, I was just doing some more because I knew that, it was something that the kids needed to do at home. Where before I would have them pre-colored, I left them blank so that they could, it was the added thing of them being able to color it. And so I made a paper doll, which was something that I had from when I was a child. So they could color in the little dress and then put the doll together. And it was something to do to kill some time. So I think that was something like an added thing that I had been lulling over it for some time. And then once this COVID thing started, I said, okay, now I just have to do it to put it out there.
Thank you for sharing that. In fact, we would like people, if you wish, Lorinda has a variety of pages though. Where can they find this?
Yes.
Lorinda manages a number of pages.
Yes.
Where can they find these printables, please?
The printables are on birdwithafrenchfry.com.
Okay, birdwithafrenchfry.com. Elise. So, as an architect, Elise, how do you breed creativity in your daily life?
In fact, I was going to pick up on what Andrew said. I think sometimes I think of my brain as being divided into the back part is the dreamer, the front part is the more realistic. So first I allow myself to dream and kind of to think outside the box, but then you have to obviously ground yourself and be more realistic in what you're going to project, because of course you cannot like when I used to practice like directly as an architect, you cannot like just imagine whatever it may be, because obviously you have so many other implications, and you have safety and so many other characteristics that need to be on board. But then I allow myself to be creative. I think my background allows me to be like balance out this creativity with being realistic, depending upon the situation, depending on what I'm working on. So there's the scenario when, for example, I am thinking about a new project. So I allow myself to venture in whatever direction. And then there's also the problem solving aspect, which is a very kind of, I consider myself to be a problem solver. If I face a target or an issue, I'm going to try and be creative in the way I approach things. And that potentially leads to new ideas. So this is kind of the way. It's sometimes very contradicting. I tend to think of myself as being quite a contradicting person. So it becomes very confusing in my head sometimes. But you just have to accept it and allow yourself to think whatever, and just, okay, then there's the reality check. You're like, okay, this is what I have to do. This is what I want to achieve. There's this idea, there's this idea, there's this idea, there's this idea. Okay, gut feeling, this is going to go well, so we go for it.
Okay.
But I really enjoy collaborating. So I think I'm going to bring on Rafael on board. I think it's a balance because sometimes when you kind of discuss things and issues and whatever, someone else might ground you more or else might dream more. It depends.
So Rafael is the person who grounds your thoughts.
Not necessarily. I think we balance each other out.
Okay. So just for the people, because most people wouldn't know that Rafaela, Elise, and Esther all work within the same, they have something in common, which is the Gabriel Caruana Foundation, which is why they will refer to each other possibly throughout the session as we go. Rafaela, she brought you into the picture.
Yes.
Sorry, Raf.
No worries. I'm on to my second coffee, so I'm pretty much alert at this point. So no, as in creativity, it's I don't know. As Elise was mentioning, it's for me it has something to do with problem solving. So if there's some issue that's really annoying me, or something that I feel needs to be done, I somehow I have this urge to tackle it. If it's, I don't know, if it's something from something small to something more large scale or philosophical, whatever.
Maybe you can use an example, Rafaela.
All right, something that something that we worked together, Elise and Esther, recently, and which you were also involved. It was so I have this interest in transportation and public transport and walking, and I wanted somehow to combine it with an aspect that we work on, which is the legacy of Gaber Caruana and his participation in Carnival. And we also wanted to link it, as I was saying, with pedestrian rights. And of course, Carnival generally, if it happens now, we wouldn't be allowed. But generally, it means that we go in public spaces, we walk anyway. And we started thinking about this walking and Carnival, walking and pedestrian rights. And somehow we developed this this workshop. It was targeted for kids mainly, where we set out a number of workshops throughout February and developed this papier mâché making workshop, where the kids were they were introduced to Carnival and what it means, and they were also introduced to also how art can be a form of activism, so artivism as well, and also something that they could do by themselves, so papier mâché, it was crafty as well. And yeah, I mean, at face value, it seems a bit random how we approached it, but I think a lot of our projects that we embark on generally are random. So I think creativity for me can be equated to randomness that makes sense.
Okay, well, if I may butt in there, since I know what you're talking about, I think because I was observing the children.
Okay, better.
When I was I mean, I was there during the workshops, and what you did, so during the first workshop, you gave them an idea of what Carnival is and what actually walking on the streets is like. And the children were asked to think of their kind of ideal street, what they would remove, what, you know. And I think that it really stuck with the children, because on the last day, and even throughout the weeks when they were developing their work of art, papier mâché, they kept on talking about it. So they kept on reasoning how their art was going to reflect their thoughts and how they were going to put more trees. So Esther, for example, was helping one of the girls with putting in twigs. Because trees were very important for the girl. There was another boy who I remember had stop signs and things like that, and a cat in his. So he developed a mask in the shape of the head of a cat, and on the cheeks, instead of having rosy cheeks, I think he had stop signs or one-way signs, if I remember well. So it's like you developed an aspect that the children unconsciously think about, and that they carried on throughout the workshop. I see Esther nodding, so maybe Esther can take up while either on this or telling us about how creativity manifests itself in your life, perhaps.
With regards to creativity, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay. I think with regards to the children, it's in their case, creativity has a lot to do with also with responding to what is happening outside of ourselves. So what is happening in our direct environment. And so it's kind of creating that link between what is happening inside of ourselves internally and in our minds, and then how to connect that also to what is happening outside of ourselves. And I think with regards to that workshop, we kind of strengthened and shed more light on what is happening in the children's direct environment, and in helping them then create their personal masks, their self-expression of how they processed that sort of the idea of, as you said, pedestrian rights, if that makes any sense. But that's the way I saw it. It was like we helped them process the idea of what is happening around them, and then facilitated them in their self-expression of how they process that idea in their internal world.
And unavoidably, sorry, go, Rafaela.
No, something that's one of, I think it's one of the things that's important for us as a foundation that Esther is mentioning, the self-expression, and it's our workshops are generally, rather than have participants create something that is set, and we tell them you have to do this. We, as Esther is saying, generally we kind of facilitate and let the participants then develop their own work. There is an overall idea, there is an overall concept. However, then each and every participant has a kind of a space where they can be more expressive.
Yes, when they can bring out their own individual thoughts and kind of manifest those through their art. Unavoidably, Esther brought into the picture another aspect of creativity. So typically, a lot of people would think that creativity refers only to the arts, for example, or only to haphazard ideas that actually come to mind. But in reality, it's very far from that. So the generating ideas is only one aspect of how we can actually be creative. And the way Esther was bringing the argument about, you hinted, Esther, at the process. So we do go through a process. So we do have, for example, in the carnival setup, you had a goal, you had like a general idea. And then you you facilitated the exploration of the idea that in turn was developed over, I believe, 4 weeks. Okay, and ultimately there was the manifestation. So even in terms of the artists, even in terms of, I don't think that, for example, Tina or Andrew or Stephanie just wake up in the morning and say, oh, you know what? I have a new product line in mind, you know? So there's, I don't know, maybe one of you would like to pick up on that and tell us how there's a huge difference between the three of you, how you do things, but
we have a collection that, for example, Craig and I started discussing, I believe, in 2018. And one of the things that we agreed was that if we really want to do the collection how we want it, we know that we don't have enough skills to do it how we want it. Like, we might have the thinking, we might be able, but we don't have the skills for the execution. Case in point, we're building a new shop now. We're learning more about electricity, plumbing, furnitures. So if you want to really take over a space and build your own installations, you need to be able to figure out some of the basics, or great suppliers and collaborators that can help you make your vision happen as well. So we really believe in the process, and we're not going for that collection before we know we have all the skills. And that puts us in a position where all the other collections and all the other collaborations and opening a new Souvenirs That Don't Suck shop, for example, it's all part of the process leading us to be able to do that collection and express it the way we think we should express it. So the goal that you mentioned and the process is what leads us as an art studio. I mean, sometimes then there are things where we do them just a bit for fun, because having a collection coming in 3 years tends to not give you that instant satisfaction as well. but we really believe in the process. We believe that everything we do, we need to improve just a little bit on the one before. Even if we tried to build, I don't know, a light box, and the first one was really, really weak, or the finishings are really far from what we need, you know? Like the next one just needs to be a bit better, just to be a bit better. And that, if you take it throughout the 4 years that we started, automatically you end up building and building, and your thinking starts becoming different. But also you don't get clouded with the basic things that you now figured out, you know, and you know their role. And maybe later on, maybe for this collection, we might decide to say, let's revisit something that we've always done this way. Because I think now we have skills to do it a bit more efficiently, or we do it a bit differently so it fits the overarching concept that we're going for. So that's the process that we constantly negotiate with each other. Sometimes deadlines dictate, sometimes budget dictates, sometimes creative thinking dictates, you know, and sometimes our commercial director needs to make it happen, and sometimes he tells us there's no way it's going to happen. So it's that constant, I think for us, it's a constant negotiation between 3 people that agree on the same goal, but have different approach on a micro level, you know, like Craig is more on the creative side. Simon and I are more on the logical side, but I think I'm somewhere in between Craig and Simon. So I'm the translator sometimes. But the process is what gets us to work where we're all proud of, you know, because if it's just me, I wouldn't have done it. I would have done it differently from what Craig would have done it. Craig would have done it differently from me. Simon would have probably designed on Excel, but all of us together with our creative process leads us to ultimately who we are then.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it, because you also brought in the concept of experience. So like, to be creative, you don't necessarily have to just come up with brainwaves all the time. And you're mentioning that your experience gives you the advantage of combining old knowledge with new things that will take you forward as you go along. I don't know whether, for example, Stephanie would like to join in here.
Yeah, what Andrew said is very true, because I think there are always different levels to approaching something. It could be creativity, or something inspires you and just want to work on it, or it could be something that you've thought along, or it could be a collaboration. So you are constantly bouncing ideas, or one thing leads to another. Sorry, you said something I wanted to touch base on, but I forgot now. With regards to me, I started 12 years ago from nothing, basically. I had just come back to Malta, and that was something I wanted to do, doing my own thing. So there was no feasibility study or a thought out process. I just decided this is what I want to do. I had many changes in my life, and I wanted to do this thing. I see myself, if I compare myself to 12 years ago, obviously I'm a totally different person. I also keep thinking a month ago I was different, let alone 12 years ago. So I think one thing is that we have to keep pushing our boundaries. Always, you know, I've done this before, let me try it differently. Different perspective, different approach. It could be a different way of thinking. It could be different medium. It could be whatever, but always trying something different. Like when I'm drawing, for example, I like to introduce something in my drawing that I haven't done before. First of all, otherwise it becomes boring, and boredom has nothing to do with creativity. When you're bored, you're not being creative. So it's about pushing boundaries, I think, on every level. Just as Andrew said as well. And so even if you're on your own or with others, it's about always finding new ways how to do things.
Tina, and the work that you do deals a lot with the psychological aspect of how we see ourselves, how we portray ourselves.
Yes.
How does creativity come into it? How does it take shape?
At the moment, I consider my work to be, I'm calling it like exposure therapy. So just a little brief, I'm basically doing a collection on myself where I'm painting myself in uncomfortable positions. And the thought behind it was I have certain insecurities, and art is something that I find extremely beautiful. So I want to turn something which is not, which like to me wasn't beautiful. Like I struggled with body image, and so something which is uncomfortable, I wanted to turn it beautiful, because to me art is very beautiful. And I started seeing it that way, and it really helped me change the way I think about myself. But as everyone's been saying, I think it's just different approaches, how you tackle certain obstacles and overcome them. But I like to work a lot from feeling and expression, and I always like to have an emotional connection to my work, which it does make me think very differently. And in the collection I had before as well, which was painting people on the beach, I also interviewed the people, so I go very deep into my work that way. For some reason it makes me more creative. Like the more knowledge I have on the thing I'm studying, the more open I feel to express it.
In fact, going back to the process that we mentioned earlier, looking for information is an important part of the process.
Definitely.
In order to be creative. Lorinda, I have a question for you now. So you do manage a number of pages, and going through those pages, there's lots of creativity coming out of every pore, it seems.
Yeah.
How do you find the inspiration? How does it happen?
Well, the question has like even come across me, like I do have a lot of pages to manage, but they all intertwine in one way or another. I find the inspiration even just from my own son, you know, even from channeling my own child, like from when I was young, like what did I like to do? What was interesting for me? What would I have liked to have? What would I have liked to have done, you know, in terms of the crafts or the things that I create? I do kind of think when I was a child. Having said that, I was always very creative, and I always liked, you know, drawing and coloring and cutting and all the crafts and things like that. But it was always seen as, you know, a hobby. Oh, it's cute, or it's, you know, it's not. I was pushed to, you know, to studies. You know, you have to do your sciences. You know, you can only do kind of things that are tangible. You know, law, medicine, teaching. Creativity wasn't seen as, you know, like something that you could be successful at. So it helps me when I look back at being a child and the things that I would have loved to pursue in a way. So that does continue to inspire me like every day, to be honest.
Okay. So your inspiration comes like from everyday inputs.
Yes.
But also like going back to your roots.
Exactly, you know, going back to my roots and seeing, you know, and what would apply, what would be like fun for children today, what would be applicable for children today, but also, you know, bringing back a bit of retro. I mean, I'm a 70s child, so, you know, there is a bit of nostalgia, you know, in it. And I also believe that it, like art and creativity and crafts and the things that I do, need to be attractive to the parents as well, in the sense of, you know, having it be something nice that they would want to do, or if their kids do the craft, it would be something that they would consider, you know, putting on display, as opposed to just a piece of paper kind of, you know, all the time, paper and paint. I also, you know, when I'm doing the crafts with the kids or the videos, I also encourage like not to use, you know, to copy me exactly. I constantly encourage their own ideas. So I want children, and, you know, when I'm doing my videos or whatever, I'm trying to tell kids to be creative in their own ways. you know, so they kind of, unless they're, sometimes you have to poke a little to encourage children to be a bit more creative. Just because I'm painting it red doesn't mean that you need to. So, you know, whereas maybe when I was a kid, it was, you know, the sky is blue, the sun is yellow, you know, the grass is green. Whereas now it's, you know, I really love when I see the children being very, you know, fluid about everything or the things that they're doing.
I think there's a really good manifestation of what you're saying, so kind of testimonial to what you are saying on your own page on Camp Create.
Yes.
Things that the children come up with on that page is really fantastic. So well done.
The last from, by just an example, the last session that I had done with them, I had showed them what we did, and we did this little puppet, but what it was just literally like magic, you know. I said, imagine characters from a story. And I could literally see their, you know, their imagination bubbles, you know, growing. And when they were building their characters, I could tell that they had feeling in their characters. And it wasn't just, here's a toilet paper roll, here's some paint, put some glue and put it together. It was more of a build-up, you know. It was in activating their imagination.
That's true. Elise, architecture is seen as something static. It seems like that there's many rules, many, you know. How does creativity come into it? Where do you find inspiration so that architectural work can actually be creative?
A lot of different aspects, I think. So there's definitely the site. The building cannot be treated in isolation. There's obviously getting to know who you're designing a building for. So what are their traits? What are their characteristics? What are their interests? What do they want? How do they spend their time? Obviously, the limitations are there. You have guidelines, you have laws and whatnot. However, first you have to see the interests of who you're going to design the building for and what use it's going to have. Obviously, it needs to be functional, but this is what brings in kind of the well-being of a particular person. Designing a building which is not suited for livability or for its function, whatever it may be, obviously defeats its whole purpose. So it's quite malleable and very fluid. So inspiration comes from quite a number of sources, and this is where kind of you need to see the goal, and then you see how you're going to be creative into achieving that goal. That's kind of the most in a nutshell.
Well, fair enough.
The process is very important, of course, and I think giving to the people, especially the client, not necessarily the client because it might be designed for someone else, but getting to know the people is obviously one of the most important priorities, I would say.
Okay, I'd like to open up the question to everyone, really. So I've noticed that, for example, I happened to be watching TV yesterday and I saw Stephanie on TV, as I said at the very beginning, and you were unveiling new products, for example. I don't know, Stephanie, where do you get your inspiration from? Is there one source, different ones? How does it happen?
To be honest, I don't know how it happens. I think something speaks to me. That's the best way to, I think, explain it. I'm very emotional, very intuitive and spontaneous as well. The logical part comes later, but sometimes I have, for example, a plan and then something comes to mind and I forget about all my other plans and I work on it. It's not always good, I know. Especially when I speak to my accountant and doesn't always work out, but things happen, things speak to me. I am somewhere, something inspires me, or I have these links kind of in my head, one thing linking to the other, and then the idea develops. So it is a process that some of it happens spontaneously, some of it happens rationally, and then obviously I need to sketch and explore and see how best to express it, which medium to use, how to go about it, if it makes sense just for me, or if it can be something that I can share with everyone, you know. But I like to leave a lot of space for spontaneity as well, and for things to happen rather than, I don't like forcing things. I like to be spontaneous. Even in my use of color, I like to be spontaneous. So I like that. I enjoy that. It's what makes me an artist, rather than when I am into more in the role of a graphic designer. When you're in the role of a graphic designer, like I used to work professionally as a graphic designer, it's more interpreting someone, that those years when I was working, obviously a client's product or service, how best to convey their message. So there's a lot of thinking. You have to be rational, you have to think about, you know, typography and all the rest. But when I go, obviously I use that kind of thinking, and I rationalize things obviously when I'm designing my packaging, my branding, and all the rest. But when I'm more on I want to be the artist, I want to be more free. So I try to balance those things out as well.
That's interesting to look at. I have the same question for Esther though. So Esther, how does inspiration come about, given that you deal with some quite diverse aspects where creativity can be manifested? Your professional work in terms of as a psychologist, Project Eagle, Gabriel Caruana Foundation. How does it all come together, if it does? We need to unmute you, Esther. Hold on. Sorry about that. For some reason, the others just come in, but I had to unmute you. Okay.
So basically, how I approach creativity in general is from a Gestalt perspective. One of my favorite quotes is from a Gestaltist called Malcolm Parlett. And he says that living well is an art form. Life is not a science, but an improvisation. So the idea is that creativity is present basically in everything that we do continuously. So how we go about our daily lives, especially particularly in this time, as we've all learned, we need to adapt to the new situation. From a Gestalt point of view, we call it a creative adjustment. So we are continuously creatively adjusting to new situations that life presents itself. And in doing so, we are basically continuously in a creative process. So we don't think of creativity only serving the artistic community, but we believe that everyone is a creative being continuously. So how I approach life is, in a way, if I feel that something isn't working or can be better, the idea is to deconstruct it and rebuild it again in a way that fits me. And that is the way of living well. So it's yourself in process. You're continuously changing, continuously learning, continuously adapting to what life presents. So we are not who we are 5 minutes ago. We are not who we were a year ago, but we are ourselves at every stage in life altogether. With time, I wrote down some notes while I was listening to everybody. And one thing that stood out was also like how many people are seeing people become at this point in time becoming very artistic and experimenting with the artistic side in themselves. And I think one of the creative adjustments of that is that people are trying to learn how to cope with the anxiety that COVID brings into our lives at this point. Ultimately, creativity trumps anxiety. And it's definitely a great thing that people are exploring themselves and experimenting with different ways of dealing with this current situation. So it would be great, in fact, if the other speakers could send links to their websites for these materials, and that I would be able to share them among the therapeutic community as well, so that people can have access to them also via these channels.
Okay, thank you. How would you say, I'd like to home in on this, Esther, if you don't mind, because you were talking about us not being the same as we were before, and in a way we are not the people who will be in 5 minutes time either, so it's just us at this point in time. And you also mentioned anxiety. How do you think that thinking positively, there's this mantra at the moment, we're trying to think positive, how can that link to us being creative and in turn reducing anxiety?
So how can we be more creative and reduce anxiety? So one of the things that I mention a lot, which when it comes to anxiety, is that the problem with anxiety, and I think COVID highlights this a lot, is this continuous sense of uncertainty. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen. It's all new, we have no idea. So there is this continuous uncertainty. And I think a lot of people feel very suspended by this. So there's a complete lack of ground. There's no direct support or information with which we can support ourselves through this time. So people are looking for other ways to support themselves, to be able to get through it on a day-to-day basis. I think one of the most important things to remember in this situation is that we have no control over COVID. We have no control over many aspects of this. So it's best to focus on what we can control. So we can control the things we do in our house. We can control the things we say. We can control the things we think, particularly. We are the only ones who can give meaning to our own lives. So in a way, it is also about, it's a choice of attitude. And the moment when these thoughts particularly become overwhelming, one strategy is to reorientate yourself. To reorientate yourself, meaning is to find things like what people are doing is artistic expression. And to take those feelings of anxiety and then to transform them or direct them, or in a way also detach from them and focus on something new. So it's a lot to do with becoming aware of how you feel in a particular moment in time, how you think about particular things. And through this awareness, then you also become in charge of your own thinking, and therefore you are giving yourself a choice on how to proceed forward. One of the ways of dealing with anxiety particularly as well is to believe that you are larger than your thoughts and your feelings. You can't control outcomes, but you are bigger than the thoughts and feelings that you have. And in that, one can take a step back and detach themselves with a conscious, calm approach, and detach themselves from COVID, from all the information that's coming your way, and yes, and focus on something else instead. I feel like I'm rambling a bit.
I think Because you're talking about something we kind of diverted slightly.
Yes, I know it doesn't really have to do with creativity specifically, but we considered a creative adjustment basically. So
It does in a way. I think Andrew wants to say something about it. Yeah.
An interesting thing what Esther was mentioning, and I think I noticed as well with the COVID-19 thing, is that the now became a lot more important, right? Like that feeling of uncertainty is why would I worry about a 40-year loan when I'm not sure if the economy is going to be standing the next 2 months? So all of a sudden, the now became a lot more important. And I think the current situation, everyone knowing that the whole world is experiencing this, it kind of fueled or reduced that resistance that we have in ourselves to express ourselves. It's like when life is okay for a lot of people and you feel like maybe you're at a rough patch or you don't feel like expressing yourself artistically, sometimes even with friends, going out. I think now that became a level playing field for all of us. Like all of us are experiencing this. So if the now is a lot more important and I have less resistance to expressing myself through art or through doing something new. Like we've seen podcasts, we've seen people on turning on their live and just go rambling and doing episodes of I don't know what. Like there's a lot more people where are saying like, you know what, why shouldn't I do it? You know, why should I leave this to only to the people that maybe have professional setups or what we're doing today, the webinars, you know, like how many times you would have spoken to someone who's a bit more conservative and working from home wasn't an option, webinars weren't an option. All of a sudden, the level play, like the playing field became all level and we're just like accelerating through our individuality, I feel like. I feel like now we have the time to think, we slowed down that rat race that we were constantly routine, going constantly, like the world came and just stopped our routine, you know, and said like, guys, you need to stay a bit home and think what you're doing. And I think that's an important milestone for us, you know, even though it's a tough situation with a pandemic. I think for creativity and for us as humans, I think that's a great opportunity.
And the pandemic triggered off the need to be creative instantly as well. Because we had to reorientate, as Esther said, we had to refocus, recenter, and find a way of how we have to be still on the go, as in still functional.
Yeah.
Okay? And still functional, although some people are equating this with the slowness of things, maybe slowness was there at the beginning. Okay, but I also sense a level of anxiety from different individuals coming from the fact that they need to cope with much more than the usual stuff. So we're not rushing around on the roads, but at the same time, parents who work full time and are expected to work full time from home now also have to do homeschooling concurrently. I don't know, within households with more than one child, I don't know how, and one laptop, for example, I don't know how that might work out. So there's almost a requirement for us to be creative so that we recenter and we're a bit more mindful, we live in the present and we make it work. Without us stressing ourselves a lot about it, because then it kind of spins out of control. So there's a lot for these drawings, because the drawing is one of the mindful activities that we can do. You're just concentrating on what you're doing at the moment. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing your resources with us. So perhaps there are a number of other people not in our audience who are not students, other people who are at home, as we all are this morning, who have to work and juggle a number of things as well. So perhaps this could be a good opportunity to try and say, okay, hold on, let me sit down a bit. Let me see what activities, what chores, what functions do I need to do right now? How can I do it differently rather than the usual way of how I go about things? Because the usual way is not usual anymore. Okay, and perhaps this could be a good opportunity to say, let's stop and take stock for a few minutes. Because to be creative, we believe that it's a deliberate process. It doesn't just happen, although sometimes you do get the bulb flashing, okay, but we also think that we need to focus, we need to think. Example, I don't know, Rafaela, when you're talking about the kids being creative in the events that you organize, or not just the kids, adults as well. It is something deliberate. It is something people sign up to do when they come to you.
Yes, we don't force them.
No, it's not, you're not the usual run-of-the-mill event organizer. How would you relate to that?
How
As
sorry,
in, it's something deliberate that what you are doing, you kind of try to look at pain points in society, like traffic was one of them, and then you organize an event around it.
Yes, it's intentional. I mean, it's it derives, like, if we want to go through it, it derives mainly from our statute. So one of the main aims of the foundation is to actually develop a discourse around environmental issues, about around social justice, through creative and artistic means. And it's a way, it's a choice that we made when we founded the foundation. So we saw that contemporary art, I have a baby next to so you'll hear some babbling soon. So we understand contemporary art as meaning a way to develop contemporary discourses, to develop and somehow tackle contemporary issues.
It's I can sit in your lap, Rafaela.
Baby has been taken away.
Okay, actually, shall we perhaps take this cue and see if anybody from the audience has any questions for our speakers? I did see in the chat area that there was a message from Sandra, and she asked, has anyone come up with creative ideas or strategies in this slow time for crisis, which does not allow for face-to-face events? In a webinar the other day, Andrew, for example, spoke about creating alternative future strategies. Maybe you could say more? And maybe if anybody else has any questions, you can unmute your mic one at a time and just verbally ask.
It's interesting because I think Rafaela just mentioned the statute and the purpose, and I saw this question before, and I think that's, whether it's with post-COVID, current situation, before, I think the most important thing for a strategy is to know your purpose. Like, if you don't know why you're doing it, then you're never going to be in a situation where you can take the best decisions to achieve why you're doing it, especially when it comes to these crises. I think what Sandra's referring to here, last time I explained how Souvenirs That Don't Suck, we went from signing to open a new shop in Valletta, and a massive investment that was our room for growth. And at the same time, on a chat with my partners, we're discussing how we're going to deal with closing this Lima shop. So they're totally on the opposite side. One of them is investing big money in a new shop, while the other one, we're closing a new one. So we would have never planned that in one of our strategies before COVID, you know? So, so what we did was literally go back to the drawing board, stick through our process, and plan our next strategy based on what our purpose is, you know? Like, what do we want to achieve? What role do the shops have for us as an art studio? How is it going to change if these things are like, if retail changes, if tourism stops, you know? So what we've done is we know our purpose, we know where we stand, and then we just adjusted the parameters of that were forced on us, you know? Like if we can't open the shop, it's useless to say like, yes, we believe in commercial avenue so that we can keep growing. It's just not there. So I think it's the first thing when we're planning a strategy is to actually know why you're doing it, and at the same time, what are the current situations that don't allow you to do, like the constants, you need to take them straight away, and then start planning. And there's no right or wrong answer, you know, like we can't meet face to face. That's a parameter that was forced on us. How to go around it is all about what works for you and stay in line with your brand, with your purpose, with why you do it. Because if there's a parameter like we can't meet in public, for example, and the first thing you do is to find a way that it's really not you, ultimately in the long run, that's gonna come haunt you back, you know? Ultimately, you're moving away from your process, you're moving away from your purpose, you're moving away from what we believe is the reason why we do it every day, you know? Like, I don't want to be post-COVID and look at the Fittats and souvenirs that don't suck and then like, yeah, why did we act like that in a current situation, you know? I want to look at it and it's like, wow, we actually survived a pandemic and we came out of it still feeling that this is who we are, you know? So that's the way we look at it. I hope I help Sandra with this.
I wonder if anyone actually has any suggestions for dealing with this slow crisis situation. Do you have, I mean, you're all creatives, so maybe you can help our audience with some tips and strategies that they could do, they could practice. Any ideas?
I think we need to take care of ourselves. I think that is the first thing. That's like, let's not ignore that there is a pandemic worldwide, you know? Like, I think that that focus of taking care of ourselves is important. And I think the community is coming like as a main focus right now, you know, and it's super important that we look at our community, because there's so many opportunities that in a fast world we used to take for granted, that there might be small quick wins, like we call them, that can help you get to a bigger thing or get the wheel turning again.
Keep the motivation up.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have a question from the audience, and we actually have more than one. So one of them would be, so thank you, Silvana. Can any one of the speakers give us an example of what behavior they think will change post-COVID? So possibly in general, societal behavior, I don't know. How do you think that behavior will change post-COVID, basically?
If I may pick up on this, working on wearing my curator hat and working on community projects and social engaged projects, I think this is one of the fears, but also one of the adaptations we have to like acknowledge the fact that we don't know what parameters will be imposed upon us. We know that currently we have to hang out in groups of 3. There is this physical distancing. There is this adaptation to this whole online world. So we're kind of, I don't know, personally, I feel I kind of fall into theorizing on, okay, when will we be able to go outside? When we'll be able to meet in groups? What is the feeling going to be? So I think the key to that is like adaptation. There is a solution to whatever we may face, and essentially the most basic solution is just acceptance, I think. and it helps possibly control the anxiety in dealing with such a situation. So whether it's I don't know, one of the theoretical examples I figured, imagine we want to meet up for a meal and we are only allowed to meet in public spaces and keeping this physical distancing. It still can happen. Why? Because we can host a meal together in a public space. We gather in groups of the numbers we are allowed to group in, and we distance ourselves according to the parameters that are imposed. So up to, like, definitely adaptation is something that will allow us to also keep sane, I think. And also, like, even with the Gabriel Caruana Foundation, the mill is closed. We still have a program to carry out. How are we going to reach our audiences with this online thing? We've had discussions. Okay, is this online world us? Is it not? How are we still going to project our ideas in a way that will still reflect us, will still reflect what we want to achieve, but obviously still providing a platform for to support artists. So there is, like, it's right now I feel that my brain personally is like 150%, 150% geared on being creative and to trying to solve the different
So I actually have a question which might bounce off from what you're saying, but it's open for any of you who wants to take it up. So you're going on 150% in terms of efficiency now, because you're constantly on the go. And that's probably something that people didn't see coming. That a lot is expected out of people in terms of trying to deal with everything. However, at times we kind of get stuck. And I'm going to merge two questions in one now by different people in our audience. So one of the questions was, how do you deal with procrastination? Because at times when you are overwhelmed, you end up procrastinating things because you don't know where to start from. And leading from that, possibly when you have this block that you want to go, but you just can't. How do you deal with it? How do you actually start the engines again? So one aspect is the procrastination, and the other aspect is how do you overcome creative blocks? I don't know who wants to take it up.
I often come across days where I just, no matter what I try and think of, it won't. For no way, no how, I get really stuck. When I get these days, what I prefer to do is just let it go. So I say, okay, today I'm, nothing's coming. I often, feel like I won't be able to be creative at all. And I just say, okay, it's done. Today is one of those days. If I wake up the next day and I kind of, try and access or try and work on something and it's not coming, I say, okay, coming to terms with saying, okay, today is not a good day for creativity, and saying, I'm just going to let it go, helped me immensely. Because when I say, all right, done, I'm not doing it, but for example, giving myself a time frame and then saying, okay, I'm going to give myself in a day, 2 days, or later in the afternoon, it really helps me overcome the block, because I allow myself you open up and you say, you just accept it. And then I don't know how, but just without me knowing it, then it just starts again, and then I say, okay, now I'm back in the zone, if you want to say, but when I find there was a time where I was like, oh, I need to work on something, and I'm, this creative block, and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, it just makes you feel like worse. So, the more I feel like I need to work on something and I can't, I would be pushing myself in that like negative kind of way. And then whereas when I just said, I feel it and I accept it and I allow myself the time, it comes back easier, let's say that. So I give myself that time to be blocked, for example, let's say, and then something just triggers it back again.
Any tips, anyone, on how we can deal with procrastination?
I think it's also a matter of self-discipline throughout your life, right? Like if you see that you tend to procrastinate, you need to go on a, I think, lifelong journey to actually minimize and understand what triggers your procrastination. I don't think there's a formula or there is a blog you can read and it's like, do this, you will, you know, but I think it's very important to understand maybe you can handle just 4 hours of creative thinking, you know, and you do 3-4 hours, and then don't kick yourself because you think you didn't do 8 hours because someone said 8 hours is a regular day at work, you know. So it's looking at why you're considering procrastination. I think what Lorinda said is amazing. Like the worst thing you can do for procrastination and for blockage is to kick yourself that this is happening and then worry about it and then just go in a loop that you're never gonna get out, you know. Like worrying about that is dangerous, you know.
And it's a wasted energy as well. You're wasting your energy like that. So it's better to go out for a walk or something. I think one needs to be disciplined as well, especially, I mean, if this your creative job or whatever you do is your bread and butter, you need to be disciplined and you need to persevere. But when you get these moments, do something completely different. Distract yourself. It could be still productive, but it could be something that doesn't require mental energy, you know. Do something different and go for a walk or something, have a nice coffee or whatever, just, and it will eventually come back. But
Break the routine.
Energy.
That's it. So break the routine in a way. So as Andrew said, it's good to kind of be in check with what you can actually achieve before you have a huge list that you just cannot start working on, and perhaps you start working on the ones that are more achievable.
And don't compare yourself. That's also something. Sometimes you hear, when I started off years ago, I was hearing these other maybe creatives who wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I used to tell myself, oh my goodness, I'm not a morning person. I will never wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was feeling like I'm a failure, or I'm not gonna you know, manage to lead this life that I'm dreaming of. And then I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna be me. I'm just gonna be me. I wake up, if I wake up at 7 or at 8, that's my biological clock, and I can work till 10 o'clock at night, but that's me, you know. Some people work throughout the night. I don't, I sleep. I want to sleep throughout the night. So don't compare yourself. Be true to who you are. But try and be disciplined, you know. Don't be too hard on yourself, but persevere.
Fair enough. So you're talking about persevering. Someone asked us a question about something that you said, Stephanie, pushing boundaries. How do you push boundaries?
As I said, you try new things. It could be, for example, a new technique, or trying something you've never done before or never thought of doing before. Or it could be in a drawing, for example. You know, you never drew. For example, I had one piece where I had to draw lace. I said, oh my goodness, how the hell I'm gonna do that? You know, so you try it, or you try a different way of sketching, or you explore, you experiment. For example, lately I was drawing on ceramics, something I haven't done before. So you try things that you haven't done before, basically, and you try to be good at them some way or another. If not, you try something else. It's the creative adjusting that Esther mentioned is very apt. We adapt in whatever way. It could be our way of life, it could be in what we do. It's a constant change. In life, I think our life is a creative process all along, whichever route or path or journey we choose. And if we don't do that, we're not growing, we're static, and that's not the way to live.
It's fair enough. In fact, here I have a comment from Alejandro, and he said, like, I'm a musician, and with the music, we sort of embrace the idea that theory is descriptive and not prescriptive, meaning that it shouldn't function as a strict framework dictating what the composer should write. In other words, it describes what happened in the music of the past and should not instruct what will happen in future. And it's kind of, if you stop relating it to music and you adapt it to the general picture of life, you don't get stuck with the comparisons that Stephanie mentioned earlier on, and that we kind of make it work for us, really. And that's the beauty of it, making things work. Thank you, Alejandro, for sharing that. I have some good students in class, you see. So when you face a period in your life where you have a creative block, I think we have addressed that. I'm trying to look at the comments, but if someone can help me be more organized. 2 questions, and one especially for Esther. So the importance on process was mentioned and highlighted several times. Are there any specific tools or methods you use for fostering creativity to help with problem solving, Esther?
So the second question, I think, was more directed at me. So are there specific tools to foster creativity or to help with problem solving, and ways to ease anxieties? So in this question, there's a mention of like, how is creativity better than Netflix binging in easing anxiety? Using things like television and not binging TV is basically a way to desensitize yourself from the anxiety that you are currently feeling. So the idea is that we are trying to repress it. So in using television, for example, it's nice, don't get me wrong, it's nice to sometimes be able to switch off, and it's okay. But when we're trying to do it to a point where we are trying to repress it and desensitize ourselves from completely experiencing it altogether, then it becomes an issue. Because that's like, then we are replacing one thing to get rid of another. It's like some people turn to drugs, drinking, excessive playing on the PlayStation, for example. All these things are methods to repress. So it may sound a little bit strange, and I'm going to build on what Stephanie actually said about trying to push really hard for a change. Obviously is very counterproductive. Even trying to push things out of our awareness, like trying to push anxiety out of our awareness, very often makes us feel worse, not better. Now, what Stephanie mentioned as well is what we in Gestalt, we call it actually the paradoxical theory of change. So the more we push, actually it was Lorinda, the more we push for change to happen, the more it doesn't. So letting it go, accepting where we are right here and now, that is actually when change happens. And that's why it's called paradoxical, because you would think like if you're striving for change, that's when change would happen, rather than when you don't do anything at all and kind of just accept how things are. Now, with regards to how creativity will help us, as said by many of the other speakers, creativity helps self-growth. So the idea here is that and this would answer also some of the other questions that there are, is coming in touch with who you are, what your needs are, and paying specific attention to what it is, what you currently need in a specific moment, and honoring that will help self-growth, will help you feel better, will help you move forward. It's very, very important that I think, and being alone or being cooped up as we are right now, we are more and more confronting ourselves, and with that comes certain challenges. And this is why, for example, also there are many more helplines available also to help people pass through this current place that they find themselves in, because it's very, very difficult that after suddenly from being stuck in a rat race, we are from 100 to a 0, and now sort of a lot of things are coming and bubbling up to the surface that we were previously unaware of because we were so distracted and busy with a lot of other things. So I think it is a really good time to start experimenting in the sense with, who am I? What do I like? What do I don't like? What would I like to do? Who do I like to become? And asking oneself these questions as well. And I had found a really lovely quote here as well by another gestaltist whose book is called Creative Process. And he says, making music, sculpture, pictures, or creating change in another's or one's own life is taking the risk of releasing oneself, one's heart and soul into the world. And I think building on this with community, sharing our creativity is a big part of it. Because very often we don't create just for ourselves, we create it as a social action to share with others or in response to others. And here we are trying to communicate to other people what we feel inside or what we feel is happening around us. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you very, very much there, Esther. It's kind of soothing to listen.
I have a habit of going into a whole...
Thank you very, very much for sharing that with us. So in a way, going back on what Esther said, because we started off with creativity and what inspires creativity, what triggers, how we're actually motivated to become creative. But Esther took us back to basics. And for us to be able to come up with creative products, perhaps it could be a good idea for us to learn who we are a little bit more and how we might be more creative in turn. Because there might be some things about ourselves that we are not even aware of, and that perhaps, I don't know, I might want to experiment about doing something in a different way. That could, in turn, be more creative or lead me to have a more creative product. There are many students listening in, a creative way, and not necessarily artistic, but a different way of how to approach assignments. Or how to approach student life, student work, in order to be more successful rather than keeping on going on about things in the same way we have always done. It is very important to stress out at this point in time the fact that most of us, most of our students, most of us have never learned how to study, for example. So one creative activity could be, how do I prefer to learn? How do I prefer to study? How can I produce material with the material that I have studied in a creative way in which I can convey a message? That could be some good stuff that we could actually do in order to be creative by finding out more about ourselves and how we prefer to do things. Because pardon, go.
Sorry. As I think very often, we get trapped in the idea that we think that we need to be a certain way in order to achieve what it is that we would like to achieve. And in striving to be this conceived certain way is actually extremely counterproductive. And very often you see people become frustrated, and they're becoming frustrated because the frustration lies in that we're trying to be anything other than what we are and who we are. And so I think being creative, it's very important to build a very solid relationship with yourself and and honor who you are, and that it's okay to be who you are. I think in Tina's work, that's what she is trying to convey to the world, that it's okay who she is and that she's happy being who she is. And this is her way of communicating that. So I think that is one thing that really helps creativity to flow in that sense, is then to basically to be true to oneself and to honor oneself and to accept who you are, and that some people are successful and creative when they are 18, and some people are successful and creative when they are 58. And that is okay as well, because it comes at different points in life, and we go through different stages in life, and we're all unique and different. And that is okay too.
I want to add on to that and just say a little bit about how anxiety and life challenged brought me to kind of what Esther was saying and to finding out about myself. Before, just very quickly, before my son was born, I had a creative advertising studio. When I was pregnant with him, we found out that there was a problem with the baby. We didn't know what it was. When he was 15 months old, I got diagnosed with breast cancer, and he's 7. I went through cancer. He went through 13 surgeries. That's like the short of it. Through all of it, so you could say like I've been living COVID for the past 7 years because we've been away from the country. We've been isolated very often. My outlet for anxiety and finding myself was creativity all the time. It helped me discover new products. I pushed boundaries in the sense of, you know, where I wouldn't be caught trying to do, you know, videos of myself. I said, okay, this is the way I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to put creativity. I said, now's my time. It got me to a point of saying, looking back, thinking of our lives and saying it's now or never. I've had 7 years of this. And the anxiety helped, the creativity helped me on so many ways, so many ways. So yeah, it's not, it hasn't been easy, but, and now this time for me is actually like I've been practicing for the past 7 years, to be honest. But, you know, it's a good time to push boundaries. It is a good time to find ourselves. And it's only when you actually start doing something where you might kind of start by wanting to do one thing and then end up having a different result completely. So you might not even know what you end up with but you need to start.
It's a great way of actually looking at it. So thank you for sharing that with us, Lorinda. And in fact, there are a lot of things that I wanted to ask a question earlier on. I'll backtrack a bit. I wanted to ask, so what do you think that the barriers to creativity are in your case? But I don't know where the time went, and we already overran by 15 minutes. So there you go. It must have been something good going on. And in fact, this procrastination could be one of the barriers that we set up because we might have unrealistic expectations. Not knowing who we are, not knowing what we are capable of doing, or not being able to appreciate ourselves could be another barrier. So perhaps, I don't know, maybe Tina finding inspiration or being inspired to use herself as a model and draw herself in different uncomfortable positions in order to express art. So that could have come out of another barrier, possibly being body image, the acceptance of body image that she wanted to overcome. So it's just turning things around and looking at things possibly from a different point of view. Mm-hmm. Classic example I really like to bring up in classes, I just use a plain mobile phone and I just tell my students, what can you see? And they just say, the back of your phone. I say, yes, I can see the front. It's the same thing, but we're looking at it from different points of view. And unless we learn to appreciate that, it would be kind of, we're living with a barrier as we go all the time, which could inhibit us from being creative. I wish I could go on and have this discussion for as long as we could possibly take it, but I'm aware that we also need to bring it to a close because some students have lectures. Some of us do have to work from home, even with the go slow bit. But anyway, so I would like to summarize very briefly what we've been doing this morning. So firstly, I would like to thank you all for being around. We started off with 104 participants on this webinar this morning. Some students had to leave because they had the lecture starting at 11. Some people might have had to leave for commitments. So we started off with asking a few questions. How does creativity manifest itself in your life and so on. We carried on with talking about experience and how coming up with creative ideas could also be facilitated with experience. You also looked at pushing boundaries, trying to stop and take stock. Stephanie mentioned a lot of the gut feeling that went into it. Whereas on the opposite side, we had Andrew talking about the logical aspect of things. There are all aspects of us being creative, but it takes all sorts in order to kind of make it happen. So we need to also be aware of our different modes of thinking. What do I need now? Because at times we come up with the best idea of all, or so we think, until we put it to the test. So I would like to thank you once again for sharing so much information with us this morning and for blocking 2 hours of your time to be with us. Thank you, Leonie. Thank you, Christina, for making this happen. And thank you to our colleagues for the constant support.
Thank you, Margaret, for organizing this. Thank you very much to all the speakers. You are all absolutely brilliant. Well done.
And happy World Creativity and Innovation Day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.